The sky is barely light. You're curled up in animal hide, pressed close to the people you've known your entire life, maybe 12 of them, maybe 20. The fire has gone low. Someone is snoring. A child is breathing slowly beside you, and the whole camp smells like wood smoke and damp earth and the particular warmth of bodies that have slept together for years. And then you hear it. Footsteps, too many, from the wrong direction. By the time you're upright, it's already chaos. Shouting in a dialect you half recognize close enough to your own language that you can almost catch the edges of it, but wrong in a way that makes your stomach drop. Shapes moving fast through the tree line. Your people scatter, some fight, some run, some freeze in that awful animal way where the body just stops, where every system overloads at once, and the legs simply refuse to work. And then it's over, and you're not where you were this morning. You've been taken. Now, most people expect the story to end there. Captive, enemy, tragedy. But what actually happened next, across hundreds of thousands of years of human prehistory, is stranger, more complicated, and honestly a little bit humbling for every Romeo and Juliet story ever written. Short answer? Yes. Long answer? That's what this whole video is about. Let's start with something that sounds simple but absolutely isn't. What even was an enemy tribe? We have this image of prehistoric humans living in tight, isolated bands, fiercely territorial, deeply suspicious of every outsider. And that image isn't entirely wrong. Resource competition was real, territorial violence was real. There's skeletal evidence going back at least 10,000 years of healed fractures consistent with interpersonal combat, cranial trauma from blunt force weapons. Arrowheads still lodged in vertebrae of people who somehow survived the wound and kept living. The Crow Creek Massacre site in South Dakota, dated to around 1325 CE, contains the remains of nearly 500 individuals, men, women, children showing systematic violence and perimortem mutilation. This is not myth. Conflict between groups is not a modern invention. But here's what that image consistently leaves out. These groups were not hermetically sealed. They could not afford to be. Genetic diversity is not optional for a small band of humans trying to survive across generations. Inbreeding within a group of 20 to 30 people produces catastrophic results within just a few generations. Reduced immune function, lower fertility, higher infant mortality. The math is brutal, and ancient humans could see the consequences playing out in front of them in real time. A band that never allowed outsiders in was a band that slowly, quietly, inevitably died. So the question was never really whether to mix with other groups, it was how, through what mechanism, under what terms. And the answer, across almost every human society ever studied, involves trade, seasonal gathering, ritual alliance, and the deliberate movement of people between groups. That is not primitive improvisation. That is breathtaking social engineering running on pure survival logic. There is a word for this: exogamy. It means marrying outside your immediate group. And it is one of the oldest and most universally consistent human social rules in existence, not a regional quirk, not a cultural preference, a near universal pattern across every inhabited continent. Claude Lévi-Strauss argued that exogamy wasn't simply a byproduct of genetic necessity, it was the founding act of human culture itself. The moment a group formalized the rule, "Our women are not for us alone, they are available to you, in exchange for yours," that was the moment humans began constructing the web of mutual obligation that made anything larger than a single band possible. Dramatic framing? Maybe. But the data supports him further than you might expect. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, the Kungsan, the Hadza, the Agta Aboriginal Australian groups, consistently show that between 50 and 70% of marriages involve at least one partner moving from one band to another. Not as an exception, not as a scandal, routinely, structurally, as the whole point. And when you overlay this with ancient DNA evidence, you see the same logic written directly into human genomes going back tens of thousands of years. A landmark 2017 study published in Science, analyzing ancient DNA from early European hunter-gatherers, found strong evidence of female-biased gene flow between groups. Women were moving between bands with far greater frequency than men. Let that sit with you for a moment. The young woman walking alone into a stranger's camp, carrying everything she owned, leaving behind everyone she had ever known. She wasn't just a bride, she was a treaty. She was a ceasefire made flesh. She was the thing standing between two groups and the alternative, which was violence. But let's be honest about the darker current running through all of this. Not all cross-group movement was negotiated alliance. A significant proportion happened through raiding and capture. A raiding party strikes a neighboring group, and among the things taken food stores, tools, territory are people. Almost always young women of reproductive age. Sometimes adolescent males who could be adopted. Sometimes children young enough to grow up without remembering what came before. And here is the part of this history that resists any clean narrative many of those captured individuals across the span of years integrated. They learned the new group's language, its stories, its seasonal routes, its social hierarchies, its names for things. They formed bonds, sometimes gradually and painfully, sometimes faster than anyone involved might have predicted. They raised children who knew only one home. Does that mean they forgot where they came from? Almost certainly not. Does it mean the grief dissolved? No. Grief that deep doesn't dissolve. It compresses. It becomes something you carry differently. But it does mean that the boundary between enemy and family was far more permeable than our tidy prehistory narratives allow for. Because what you call an enemy at dawn after 10 years of shared fire, shared hunger, shared children, shared loss, what exactly do you call that person by the end? That is not a rhetorical question posed for effect. That is the actual anthropological puzzle sitting at the center of this topic. Now, here is where we have to talk about something that makes all of the above look modest. You need to look at a completely different species. Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted in Europe and Western Asia for somewhere between 2,600 and 5,400 years. Two different species, different skull architecture, different tool-making traditions, different subsistence strategies. There is ongoing debate about the degree of cognitive overlap, but the physical differences alone were significant enough that the two groups would have immediately visually recognized each other as other, and they had children together. If you are of non-African descent, somewhere between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Right now, as you watch this, those variants are in your genome doing actual biological work. Neanderthal-derived sequences have been linked to enhanced immune response, better cold weather adaptation, and in some studies, marginally higher pain tolerance. You are, in a measurable sense, partly Neanderthal. And that happened because someone, somewhere, crossed a line that makes a rival band of the same species look like a minor social inconvenience. A 2016 paper in Nature suggested the mixing may have involved relatively few initial contacts that left a surprisingly durable genetic legacy. Someone's community looked at a child with a slightly different brow ridge, slightly different skull shape, features that marked them as something in between, and kept them, raised them, let them belong. That is not primitive. That is not an accident. That is breathtaking. So now we arrive at the question underneath the question, did any of this involve something we would actually recognize as love? This is where the answer gets philosophically slippery and, I think, genuinely beautiful. The neurochemistry of pair bonding is ancient, the oxytocin cascade, the dopamine reward loop, the vasopressin-mediated bonding. These are not modern constructions. They are conserved mammalian systems shared across species that diverged from our lineage tens of millions of years ago. Wolves form pair bonds. Gibbons form pair bonds. Certain species of mice form pair bonds, so strong that removing one partner causes measurable depressive behavior. The neurological hardware for something that functions like love? Your ancestors had it. It was running in the background of every interaction, every shared fire, every face seen consistently over years. But the cultural script for love, the idea that you get to choose, that you can defy your group's expectations, that is substantially newer, largely a product of the last 2,000 to 3,000 years. The ancient Greeks framed Eros as a kind of divine madness, externally inflicted, not internally chosen. Medieval troubadours invented courtly love specifically as a thing that was unattainable and therefore ennobling. Shakespeare distilled all of it into a play about two teenagers who die, and we've been using that as our template ever since. Before all of that, pair bonding happened within the social structures your group made available. Which means your ancient ancestor probably didn't stand at the edge of camp dramatically choosing someone from a rival tribe. They more likely found themselves gradually, quietly attached to someone who came from a different fire. Was that love? Maybe the more honest question is, does the label matter? The attachment was real. The specific grief of loss was real. The children were real. There is one image I keep returning to when I think about all of this. Not the raid, not the escape, not two people dying beautifully for a principle. A fire. Two people from groups that might have exchanged spears the generation before, sitting at the same fire. One of them does something, drops something, mispronounces a word, and the other one laughs before they can stop themselves. And for a second, the distance closes. Maybe one of them is sick and the other one stays close. Maybe it's just the particular way one of them tends the fire, careful, methodical, that makes the other feel slightly less alone in a world that is frequently cold and often terrifying. That is the image the genetic record is actually pointing us toward, not Shakespeare, not a dramatic sacrifice, but something quieter, more durable, and more extraordinary. The foundational story of human prehistory is an us versus them story tribes, boundaries, violence, protecting the group from the outside. But running alongside it, braided through it, was a counterstory that never gets made into a movie. The story of the person who crossed the line. Every major genetic mixing event in human prehistory left a mark not just in our genomes, but in our immune function, our disease resistance, our neurological flexibility. Sarah Tishkoff has noted that human genetic variation is not a deviation from some original pure type mixture, is the baseline. The crossing is the default. Your ancestors didn't fall in love with the enemy despite how their world worked. They fell in love with the enemy because of how their world worked. So, did ancient humans fall in love with people from enemy tribes? The short answer is yes, repeatedly, across every era we can study, in forms ranging from diplomatic alliance to traumatic capture to slow, unplanned attachment. Enemy tribe was never the fixed, clean category we imagine. It was a fluid, constantly renegotiated social reality. Our ancestors navigated with far more nuance than the word primitive can hold. And the long answer is written in your genome in the Neanderthal variants, helping your immune system in the mitochondrial lineages, tracing your maternal ancestry back through population crossings your great-grandmother never knew about. In the simple, staggering fact that you exist, which means somewhere back in the deep time of this species, someone your ancestors' group called an outsider became the person at the fire, became family. If you could go back not as an observer, but to actually live for 1 year in a small band of modern humans 50,000 years ago, would you be the one who stayed safely inside the group's boundaries? Or would you be the one sitting a little too close to the person from the other side of the ridge? Drop it in the comments. I'll read every single one,